we must ask ourselves, what is our vision in education? What is the purpose of education? Surely education must concern itself with the whole of the life of that child. I must have a feeling of being responsible to help that child in the whole of his life. That means his physical development, his intellectual development, his emotional, aesthetic development, and also his spiritual development. The whole of that is that child. And education must concern itself with the whole of the development of that child and not merely one particular aspect of it. So if I set aside all points of view and I start, as they do in physics and mathematics sometimes, just look at a problem from first principles. They said, no, don't assume anything. Start with observation, inquire, find out, and of course one knows certain truths that are universal. Not that one doesn't question them, not that one takes them as for granted. But with experience one knows that those things are true. So can we investigate this question in that way? Knowing that we do not know and wanting to find out. So unless one has investigated and inquired into that, we may be passing down our own prejudices to our own child with all good intention, passing our own conditioning. That's what generally happens, if you notice. When we feel lost, when we don't know the answer to something, we go back in the past and we try to grope at it. How our teachers, our parents treated us in that same situation. And we imitate what was done with us. But the way our parents and our teachers brought us up might not have been the right way. So how do you know? So we must ask that question in all humility, knowing that we do not know. How does a young one of an animal, a cat or a dog or a calf, grow? I notice that nature has provided a mechanism by which the young one is fed and soon becomes independent and walks away, grows on its own. I don't have to train the animal. We do when we keep pets. But perhaps the animal in his own life better off without that training, which we try to give for our convenience. And there is very limited training which you can give to the young one of an animal. But when it comes to a human child, situation is different, isn't it? He not only grows like the plant grows and the animal grows, but he is also born with a consciousness which is partially like an empty slate. It has already the biological instincts and so on written into it. But it's blank. And it's going to develop not for 1 year, 2 years, but something like 20 years, which is unlike any plant or any animal. And what I write on that consciousness is going to determine the life of that child to a very large extent. If you bring him up in communist China, he is going to turn out like a communist and a Chinese. If you bring him up in America and you write all the values of the American society, he is going to turn out to be like an American. And so on. You can make him into a Roman Catholic, you can make him into a Hindu, depends on what you write on that consciousness. You can teach him any language, put in any moral values, and he grows up with that. Also, if I bring him up without love, then psychologists tell me he may not have the capacity to love anyone in his life. So I notice it's a tremendous responsibility. The way I treat him, the way I bring him up, can cripple him mentally, exactly like an accident can cripple him physically for life. And how do you put a value on that kind of deprivation? A deprivation that a human being has become incapable of feeling affection. If I look around, I find that in society, they think a life of high quality is a life in which man is successful, he is recognized, he is respected, he has wealth, and they measure the standard of life and the quality of life by the quality of house, the quality of car, the quality of clothes that he has, and the food he eats. And I ask myself, does that determine the quality of my life? Does the amount of comfort, the number of pleasures which I can buy, does that determine the quality of my life? After all, you could be having everything in the world, a big palace, a fleet of attendants, power, and yet you could be living with tremendous anxiety, with worry, with fear, with frustration. And those things don't seem to go away. If you watch somebody who struggles very hard to rise to the top, you find that when he was young, he had little money, he had a difficult, less comfortable life. And then for 30 years he struggled, and he has reached a high position, and he has a lot of comfort now. But the main difference is that previously he was worrying in that small room of his, and now he worries in this big palace, air conditioned and all that. But he's still worried. And he has never asked himself the question whether it's possible to be rid of worry. seeing that, I say to myself, surely the quality of my mind determines the quality of my life much more than the amount of money I have, than the amount of pleasures that I can buy. Because you don't have to chase all those pleasures and have all this amount of money if you solve the problem of boredom. But if you live with boredom and you live with frustration, you have to constantly escape from these. And therefore the entertainment and the pleasures and the constant occupation becomes necessary, for which he needs money. So they may not have educated me like that. I may not myself have been able to free my mind out of the rut in which my own life is caught. But still, I want that my child shouldn't be caught in that. That I may not have been educated rightly, brought up rightly. I might have got conditioned to look at life as a series of problems that have to be solved and overcome, to look at life as a continual struggle to become something. But I am intelligent enough to know that I am caught in this trap, and I don't want my child to be trapped in this. So I ask myself, what is the right balanced development of human consciousness? I see that if he becomes overly intellectual, then he becomes a cold human being, without warmth, without affection, cold, calculating. If he is overly emotional, sentimental, again he becomes a neurotic person. So I want to bring him up in such a way that there is a balanced development of all the capacities of his consciousness. So I ask myself, what are the various capacities of the human consciousness? And I must my education must concern itself with a holistic development of all the capacities. At present, it's cultivating memory and all that is based on memory, like knowledge. It's cultivating thought, the intelligence of thought, the clever use of thought. And thought includes logic and reasoning and planning and imagination. All those faculties we cultivate in great measure in our education process at present. Then there is the whole range of feelings and aesthetic development, emotions. And education is not concerning itself with making that child understand his feelings. We only, in the better schools, they give you some lectures on moral science. In most schools, they don't even do that. And the child is left to himself. You must not be angry. You must not be violent. Don't do this set of instructions, commandments. That's about it. Education hasn't concerned itself with making or developing or understanding, helping the child to understand his feelings, his emotions, the emotions of fear, of jealousy, of frustration, of anger, of aggression, and also those of love, of affection, sensitivity, sympathy, compassion. They've simply ignored all that aspect. They do cultivate, to a certain extent, art and music and dance in some of the better schools. And it does create a certain amount of sensitivity in the child. Also, a feeling for nature, natural beauty. But it's not the mainstream. The mainstream is mathematics and physics and literature and so on, the hard subjects. Neither the children nor the teachers really interested in this. It's considered like a hobby on the side. It's not the central theme of education, central concern of education. The parents don't look at that. They look at the performance in the subjects, the mainstream subjects. So we are not really interested in the emotional development of the child, the aesthetic development of the child. And of course, there is much more to our consciousness than just thinking and feeling. There is the entire area of the capacity to observe, to pay attention, to be aware, to see holistically, to have vision. All these are not thought-based activities. They are not sentimental activities of the consciousness. And I'm afraid our present-day education has completely neglected these capacities of our consciousness, though they are extremely important. As we just said, if you don't have a long vision, you can expend a tremendous lot of energy and do a lot of work without getting anywhere. For instance, if you are an educator, as is true of many principals of schools, and you think that only the intellectual development of the child is your responsibility, then you ignore all the other aspects and you concentrate only on the intellectual development. His performance in physics, in mathematics, in literature is all that you are concerned with. And the grades that he achieves there. And if that is the limited way you look at education, you can build an educational system and expend a tremendous amount of energy, feel that you are a very successful principal, and yet it is that you really do not know. You don't know, and you don't know that you do not know. Which means you are really a fool. So seeing that, one wants that education must impart also a vision, an awareness of all that is involved in life. Not merely a particular capacity and talent to do something efficiently. So if that is my concern in education, and I want him to develop rightly, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. With a balance between all these, then I have to ask myself, how should I educate him? If I understand that, if that's my vision for education, so that he leads a life of high quality, he lives creatively, he loves his work, and all that is my concern as an educator. So I must create sensitivity. If that child can enjoy the simple pleasures of life, if he can sense the beauty in nature, the beauty in mathematics, the beauty in literature, the beauty in just having a healthy body, if he can enjoy going for a walk, if he has sensitivity and he knows the pleasure of friendship, the joys of friendship, then I have given to him a tremendous treasure, an infinite joy, which he already has, and he doesn't have to seek pleasure all the time. Then it doesn't matter if he doesn't have too much money, because money has only as much value as things which money can buy have in your life. Whatever you do, if you have a sense of beauty, there is joy in what you are doing. And can I help him to come upon that joy, which means to come upon this sense of beauty? That is the purpose of education. The beauty in mathematics and physics, there is beauty there too. So is it possible for us to look upon education as enabling the child to sense the beauty in life, so that whatever he does out of joy. He loves to do that. So if I want to bring him up like that, I have to ask myself how I am going to motivate him to do all the work that has to be done in a school. If education is really an experiment in right living being living for a high quality of life, and I have already defined what that high quality of life is, then how do I help the child to come upon that? How do I motivate the child to do all the work that needs to be done right through school and college? How do we motivate him now? We offer him rewards if he is successful, if he gets A grades in mathematics, if he beats the whole class. We offer him a reward, recognition. We rank him, we praise him. So we teach him to work for reward. The father says to him, if you get A grades in your subjects, main subjects, I'll get you a bicycle. And the poor dear does all these subjects because he wants the bicycle. Then he doesn't see the beauty in the subject. So you see what reward does. You think you are motivating him to do something which he is good for him, but you are destroying him elsewhere. And we have said our concern is holistic. I don't want him only to do this, develop intellectually. I also care about his sense of beauty, about living creatively and all that, and reward destroys that. Therefore, I will not use reward. It teaches him to use what he is doing as a means to an end and not an end in itself. Not that there is the joy, you do something because of the joy in doing it, which is creative, living creatively, but using it as a passage to something, to get something else. And we are living that way ourselves. We work 5 days in the week, 8 hours a day, doing something that is usually quite boring, uninteresting, in order to get the salary, paycheck, and with that we relax and enjoy ourselves on the weekend. And we have accepted that way of life for ourselves. But I don't want my child to live that way. I don't want to divorce joy from work and pleasure from work, from religion. I want to integrate all that in his life. Fear and punishment are the other motivations that we use at present in education. Fear destroys initiative. Fear destroys intelligence. It teaches him to conform, to obey, not to question, not to be independent, not to do something original. Out of fear, he conforms. So I'm teaching him conformity. I'm killing his sense of inquiry, his curiosity, his intelligence. Although I find that he achieves more in a particular subject, out of fear he studies that because he is going to be rebuked if he doesn't do that. But I'm destroying him psychologically. I'm killing his initiative, his intelligence, his curiosity. Life becomes, it's not a joy for him anymore. So it's totally wrong to use that as a motivation. One may have to use that occasionally in an emergency situation. It's because one has failed in education, then one has to use that as a failure, not as a method, but as a failure. When I have failed to bring him up rightly, I have to use punishment or fear. So one uses it, if at all, with a sense of defeat as an emergency measure. The third motivation that is commonly employed is comparison, competition. You must do better than your friend. We teach children rivalry. They have affection. They are friends. But the elders teach the children to compete, to do better than the other person. He does very well himself, but his friend does better than him, and we teach him to feel bad about that. By telling him, look, you are stupid. You should have done better than your friend. You must work harder. And we use that, which builds the ego of the child. And teaches rivalry and competition. Then we complain when he has grown up that he doesn't love, that he is aggressive, he is competitive. But we use that through the process of education. I wonder if any intelligent person can give a reason why a child should not be taught to feel happy if his friend does better than him. Why should I not be happy if my brother does better than me? Normally a child feels happy. If you notice in the family, if you haven't taught him rivalry, he feels happy when his brother, something good happens to your friend, you feel happy for that. He comes and says, look, he solved this problem in mathematics so well. He admires his friend for it. But when we compare him and say, you are stupid, then we sow the seeds of rivalry, of dislike, of competition. And then we complain that he is unable to cooperate later on, work cooperatively. It's quite a different matter if I teach the child that whatever he is doing, he must do his best. Because in doing so, there is the joy of doing it well. It has nothing to do with how well anybody else does. This comparison is just a disease which we have got conditioned into, we accept it and we transmit it to the child. It's our conditioning. So I wouldn't use that motivation. Competition, comparison. As a teacher, I must help every child to develop and flower. He is a unique individual. He has his own being. There is no question of comparing him with somebody else. One child may be better in mathematics, another one is better in literature, a third one is better at games, a fourth one may be better in art or dance. A fifth one may not be better at any of these, but he may be just a jolly good fellow. How do you put a value on these things? Who are you to say what that human being should be? The child who is weak in mathematics has as much right to see the beauty of mathematics as the one who is strong. He may need more attention from me. But normally, in most schools, we pay attention to the bright child because we value the bright child. We evaluate him on the basis of his ability. We don't respect that child as a person for whatever he is. A child who is not a good player of soccer or cricket has as much right to enjoy soccer and cricket as a child who is the best player in your team. So I must pay the same attention to all the children, not more to the bright ones and less to the dull. Otherwise I am destroying him, the child. Because when I compare, in comparison, he feels he is dull. But he is not dull by himself when you don't compare him. After all, if somebody asked us whether the oak tree is superior to the pine tree, how would you answer that question? It's a different individual. What does it mean, superiority? So we have to teach that in education to the children, that we are all different from each other, but nobody is superior or inferior to anybody else. That everything is different in nature, that diversity is the rule in nature, that no two leaves of a tree are the same, no two fingerprints are the same, no two human beings are the same, but nobody is inferior or superior. And you must question that. All these values of superiority or inferiority are based on the desire to dominate. If there is no desire to dominate, there is no such thing as superiority. So one must help the child to understand also what is power, what is right relationship to power. That power is not meant to dominate others. That the powerful, that power is to be used to care, to protect, to discharge your responsibilities towards others. So if I see all that all this is necessary for right education, then the question comes, how do you create a school like that? How do you bring about an education like that? First, I have this understanding, this vision of education. What is right education? Then I ask myself, how do we create that? And what are the difficulties in creating that? The biggest difficulty is that this is not something that can be transmitted like knowledge in the classroom. The child learns from what he actually sees around him, not from what you tell him in the classroom. And children grow up, they are like little monkeys, they'll just imitate their surrounding, their elders. So we must create first a community, a society which lives by these values. Then when these values are real, the child will see it. Not that you value competition, you value the bright child, you praise him in comparison to the dull child, but you talk about no competition. And it's not something that can be adopted as a policy. It must be in your blood. Then the child sees that. Otherwise, he will learn precisely what he sees. He will learn that actually one must live like that, but when you talk, you must talk like this. And you have communicated hypocrisy. So if I see that, then I say to myself, I am conditioned. I am myself not free from all this. How do I help my child, my student, to be free? It's not something I have which I can transmit to him. So being aware of that, can I learn along with him? Can we learn together? Not that I know and you don't know and I am telling you, which is a falsehood in this area. I may know more physics and therefore I can teach one who knows less physics. In that field, knowledge can be transmitted like that. But in this area, we are all the same. There is no difference between the grown-ups and the children. They have fear, they have competition, they have frustration. They cry when their doll breaks, you cry when you lose your job. Your toys are different from his toys, but exactly the same thing we go through, which he goes through. Can we help him to inquire? Not try to pretend that we have solved all these problems and create an image and so on, which is falsehood. We haven't solved them. But can I make him intelligent? And in that process, I become intelligent too. So I don't put myself on a pedestal trying to advise him, but I work along with him. I learn along with him. I also question. And I don't want him to conform. I want him to have an inquiring mind. I create all these fundamental questions and I talk with him because I see the value of self-knowledge. that it is necessary for a human being to understand all this. I may not have understood it, doesn't matter. I'll also join with him and try to understand along with him. In a sense, one is wanting to impart something which is beyond oneself. I'm wanting to give intelligence to the child which I might not myself have. I want him to come upon that. And I am the one who is doing it, and I am also the barrier in the doing of it. Because my own habits, my own conditioning, my own values which I still hold, which I haven't been able to see through, are coming in the way. I'm transmitting my prejudices to my child. And this is going on right through the world. If the Arabs transmit their prejudices to their children and they become Arab children, and the Jews transmit their prejudices to their children and they remain as Jewish children, how is the division between the Jews and the Arabs to end? The old people die, creating the young people in their own image, transmitting their own prejudices. So generation after generation, the same problems continue. It never ends. It can only end if we don't transmit our prejudices to our children, which means I must become aware of the fact that I don't know. Normally we are taught to be so proud of our own culture. We think we know, we are smart, and we are passing that on to the child. What we need is a little humility, which comes when you examine and you realize that you yourself lead a small, petty, miserable life in a very narrow channel in which your mind is imprisoned. And you don't want your child or your student to be caught in that. It's like a smoker who realizes the problem of smoking, doesn't want his child to smoke. It's a valid concern. It's a wrong thing to say that you must give up yourself. He's not able to give up. But he doesn't want his child to be caught in that. So I may be conditioned, I may be trapped. I don't want my child to be trapped. So I let him inquire. I create fundamental questions, but I don't want to transmit my prejudices. This means education must concern itself not only with creating a scientific mind, a rational mind, a sharp intellect, but also at the same time a religious mind, a mind that is concerned about truth, finding out the truth, a mind that inquires into fundamental questions, which is interested in coming upon self-knowledge. Unless we recognize this responsibility in education, and unless we can change our education, I'm afraid we'll continue to produce the kind of egotistic, self-centered, competitive, tremendously able but tremendously narrow-minded individual that we are producing today. And it is in the process of education that the individual is formed. Unless the individual changes, the world does not change in any fundamental way. You'll continue to have the same problems. You can only contain them through laws, through legislation, through better government, and so on. It will never free society of problems. it is important to educate a child such that he learns to live in harmony within himself and also with his environment. The environment includes nature, it includes other people, it includes the school, the society. Whether it is possible to live in harmony, not in conflict. Whether it is possible to go through life not regarding it as a struggle, but as a student of life. Let life come, let it unfold, and I pay attention to it, I learn from it. So to create that kind of learning mind, which is learning right through life, not only during the so-called schooling or college. It's not easy, but it's only the difficult or the impossible things that are worth attempting. So we must attempt that. If that is right education, it is our responsibility to attempt that for our children.